I'm Dr. David Mitchell, and I've been a neurologist here in Chicago for over 15 years. I work at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where I've seen the human brain perform miracles and witnessed its most devastating failures. I thought I'd seen it all. Every type of trauma, every type of brain injury, every possible outcome. But the day a 32-year-old man woke up from a coma that should have been permanent, that day changed everything I believed about medicine. My daily routine has always been filled with difficult diagnoses, uncertain prognoses, and families clinging to hope like a lifeline. Working with the human brain means walking a fine line between the possible and the impossible. I'd seen many coma patients throughout my career, and unfortunately, I knew what usually happened. Back then, I believed nothing could surprise me anymore. I was about to discover I was completely wrong. It was a cold Tuesday morning in February when the ambulance brought him in. The patient was a 32-year-old construction worker named Michael Rodriguez, young, full of broken dreams that had been brutally cut short. He was working on a downtown skyscraper when a piece of scaffolding collapsed. The impact was devastating. His family never left the hospital. His mother, Maria, held his hand every day, as if her touch could somehow bring him back from wherever his mind had wandered. I still remember her tired eyes, exhausted from weeks of sleepless nights, but filled with an unwavering faith that I envied. She would talk to him for hours, telling him about his daughter's first steps, how his wife was staying strong, how everyone was waiting for him to come home. "Doctor, he's going to wake up, right?" Maria asked me every morning during rounds. Her voice carried hope and fear in equal measure. I wanted to give her the answer she needed to hear, but as a neurologist, I needed to prepare her for reality. The initial examinations were devastating. Michael had suffered a severe head injury with significant swelling. We were able to stabilize him and perform the necessary procedures to relieve the pressure, but the damage was extensive. His Glasgow Coma Scale scores were consistently low. Week after week, there was no improvement. Before continuing, tell me in the comments which city and country you're watching from. Stories like this reach further than you might think. In the third week, I had to have the conversation every neurologist dreads. I sat with Maria and Jennifer, Michael's wife, in the small consulting room that had already witnessed countless difficult conversations. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I struggled to find the right words. "The scans show significant damage to several areas of the brain," I explained gently. "The longer someone remains in this state, the less likely they are to regain consciousness. I need you to understand that we may be looking at a permanent vegetative state." Maria's face tightened, but she shook her head firmly. "No, doctor. I know my son. He's struggling in there. I can feel it." Jennifer squeezed her mother-in-law's hand, tears streaming down her face. "How long are we going to wait?" she whispered. "It's a question that haunts every neurologist. How long do you cling to hope before it turns cruel? How long do you let a family suffer in limbo? Medical literature provides us with statistics, probabilities, and recommended timelines. But faced with a mother who refuses to give up on her child, statistics seem meaningless. "We'll continue to monitor him," I said finally. "But I want you both to understand the reality of the situation." Days turned into weeks. Michael's vital signs remained stable, but his consciousness seemed lost in a profound silence that deepened with each passing day. The ventilator breathed for him, the feeding tube sustained him, and monitors tracked his every heartbeat. But the Michael his family knew and loved remained unreachable. I began preparing the family for the possibility that he might never return. It's one of the hardest parts of my job, watching hope slowly turn to sadness as a body continues to function without the person inside. I'd seen it dozens of times. The families who finally accept reality and make the difficult decision to let go, and those who cling until clinging becomes its own form of suffering. But Maria never wavered. Every morning, promptly at 8 o'clock, she arrived at the ICU. She brought fresh flowers, usually sunflowers because they were Michael's favorite, and arranged them where he could see them if he opened his eyes. She read him the sports section because he loved baseball, played his favorite music softly, and talked to him about everyday things as if he might react at any moment. The nursing staff had grown fond of her. They reserved a comfortable chair for her next to Michael's bed, and made sure she had coffee during her long vigils. Even the most experienced ICU nurses, who had learned to maintain professional distance as a survival mechanism, found hope alongside Maria. But as we approached the 2-month mark, I knew I needed to be more direct. The chances of a meaningful recovery were becoming statistically insignificant. It was time to discuss long-term care options, the placement of a feeding tube, and the harsh reality that Michael might require institutional care for the rest of his life. That night, I stayed up late reviewing her charts again, looking for something I might have missed. Some small sign that her brain was still struggling, still trying to rewire itself. But the EEGs showed minimal activity. The MRIs revealed extensive damage, and all the clinical indicators pointed to the same bleak conclusion. I was about to close the file when my pager vibrated. It was the ICU. They needed me in Michael's room immediately. My heart sank. Emergency calls at 11 p.m. usually meant one thing: complications. Maybe his brain pressure had spiked. Or worse, his vital signs were worsening. I'd seen it happen before. The body finally gives up after fighting a battle it can't win. I grabbed my stethoscope and headed for the elevator, bracing myself for another difficult conversation with Maria, who I knew would still be there, even though visiting hours had ended hours ago. The ICU was dimly lit when I arrived. Most of the patients were asleep, and the usual daytime chaos had given way to the quiet rhythm of nighttime monitoring. But as I approached Michael's room, I heard something unusual. Voices. Several voices, and they sounded excited? I pushed open the door and stopped dead in my tracks. The scene before me was unlike anything I had ever witnessed in my 15 years of practice. Michael's eyes were open. Not just open. They were focused, alert, tracking the movements around the room. He tried to speak, though the ventilator tube made it impossible. "Dr. Mitchell," Nurse Jennifer called, her voice trembling with emotion. He just opened his eyes about 10 minutes ago. We called you immediately. His pupils are reactive. He's following commands and look." She lifted her finger and moved it from left to right. Michael's eyes followed perfectly. I felt my legs weaken. This wasn't possible. The medical literature was clear about cases like Michael's. After 8 weeks in a deep coma with his level of brain damage, the chances of meaningful recovery were less than 5%. And these rare cases usually involved a gradual awakening over days or weeks. Not this. Maria sobbed, her hands over her mouth in disbelief. "I knew it," she whispered through her tears. "I knew he was still in there." "David, can you hear me, mijo?" Wait, I realized she'd called him David. In shock, I hadn't even fully processed it. Michael was trying to nod, his movement restricted by the various tubes and monitoring equipment, but unmistakably deliberate. His eyes met mine, and I saw something there that temporarily short-circuited my medical training. Intelligence, awareness, recognition. "We need to remove the ventilator," I said, my voice almost flat. "Get respiratory therapy here right now. And call Dr. Patel from anesthesiology. We need to assess his airway and respiratory capacity." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of controlled medical chaos. The respiratory therapist arrived, accompanied by Dr. Patel and 2 nurses. We carefully removed the ventilator tube, monitoring Michael's oxygen saturation and breathing patterns. To everyone's amazement, he was breathing on his own, steadily and effortlessly. His first words were barely a whisper, his voice hoarse from weeks of intubation. "Mom, where am I?" Maria collapsed into the chair beside the bed, overcome with emotion. "You're in the hospital, dear. You had a work accident, but you're okay now. You're going to be okay." I stood there, stethoscope around my neck, watching this impossible scene unfold. Everything I'd learned about traumatic brain injury, about recovery from a coma, about the limitations of neuroplasticity, it all seemed inadequate to explain what I was witnessing. "Michael," I said softly, approaching his bed. "I'm Dr. Mitchell, your neurologist. Do you remember what happened to you?" He turned his head slowly to me, his eyes still adjusting to consciousness. "I had something falling at the construction site. And then he paused, frowning in concentration. It's like I've been somewhere else for a long time. Somewhere dark, but not scary. Just quiet. Do you know what month it is? I asked, beginning a basic neurological assessment. February? He guessed. A shiver ran down my spine. It was actually early April. He'd been unconscious for almost 8 weeks, but somehow his last clear memory was of the day of the accident. His brain had essentially shut down at the moment of impact, and was now picking up exactly where it had left off. Over the next few hours, I performed the most comprehensive neurological examination of my career. Michael's cognitive function appeared remarkably intact. His memory had been perfect until the accident. His speech was clear despite the hoarseness. His motor function was responsive, and his personality seemed unchanged. It was as if his brain were in a kind of protective hibernation. "Doctor," Maria said as I updated her charts, "I need to tell you something. Something that happened about 3 weeks ago." I looked up from my notes, curious about her tone. I was here late at night as usual talking to him, and I could have sworn I saw his hand move. Not like a reflex, but like he was trying to squeeze me back when I held his hand. The nurses said it was probably just muscle spasms, but you knew better, I finished. She nodded. A mother knows her child. I could feel him there, fighting to come back to us. As dawn broke in Chicago, news of Michael's awakening spread through the hospital like wildfire. Doctors and nurses monitoring his case stopped to see for themselves. The ICU, usually a place of hushed intensity, vibrated with an energy I had never experienced before. Dr. Peterson, head of the neurology department, arrived around 7 in the morning. I had called him earlier to report the case, though I could tell he didn't quite believe what I was saying. Now, seeing Michael sitting in bed, eating breakfast, and talking with his family, Dr. Peterson was as speechless as I was. "David," he said quietly, pulling me aside. "I've been doing this for 30 years. I've seen maybe 2 cases that came close to this kind of recovery, and neither was as dramatic or complete. We need to document everything. This case needs to be studied." But even as the medical team celebrated this incredible result, I struggled with questions that went far beyond clinical documentation. How to explain to a man that he had been declared brain dead just hours before his miraculous awakening? How to reconcile medical science with what seemed like an impossible recovery? Jennifer, Michael's wife, arrived at 8 in the morning, rushing with her 4-year-old daughter, Sophia. The little girl was with her grandparents, shielded from the reality of her father's condition. Seeing him sitting on the bed, she ran to him with the pure joy only children possess. "Daddy, you're awake! Grandma said you were sleeping, but I knew you would wake up!" Michael put her to bed with some difficulty, her muscles still weak from weeks of inactivity. "Sorry I slept so much, princess. Did you take good care of mommy for me?" Watching this reunion, I felt something shift inside me. This was no longer just a medical case. It was a family restored, a life restored, a future that had been discarded suddenly filled with possibilities again. But as a neurologist, I couldn't ignore the scientific implications of what had happened. Over the next few days, we ran every test imaginable. New MRIs, electroencephalograms, cognitive assessments, motor function tests, all working. What we discovered challenged everything I thought I knew about brain recovery. The MRI results were most intriguing. Areas that had shown severe damage just a week earlier now exhibited what could only be described as remarkable healing. Not complete restoration, some scarring remained, but the level of recovery was unprecedented. It was as if Michael's brain had somehow rewired itself during those weeks of unconsciousness, finding new pathways around the damaged areas. "Look," I said to Dr. Peterson, pointing to the comparison images on my computer screen. "The frontal lobe damage we thought was irreversible. There's new neural activity in areas that were previously completely dark." "Doctor." Peterson adjusted his glasses, studying the images closely. "David, I've never seen neuroplasticity work so dramatically or so quickly. Typically, this kind of recovery takes months or years of intensive rehabilitation, if it happens at all. That's what I don't understand, I admitted. Michael's brain hasn't just healed. It seems to have optimized itself. His cognitive function tests are above average in several areas. The case attracted the attention of neurologists across the country. Dr. Emily Jang of Johns Hopkins called to discuss the case. Dr. Robert Williams of Stanford requested copies of all the scans. Medical journals began contacting them, wanting to document this remarkable recovery. But despite all the scientific interest, what struck me most was how Michael himself processed his experience. During one of our follow-up appointments, he described something that I still think about to this day. Dr. Mitchell, he said, sitting in my office 3 weeks after waking up. I know this may sound crazy, but I remember being unconscious. Not as if I were remembering a dream, but as if I were aware that I was somewhere else. I leaned forward, intrigued. Can you describe what that was like? Michael paused, choosing his words carefully. It was like being in a room without doors but not trapped. Just waiting. Sometimes I heard voices, my mother talking, the nurses examining me, machines beeping. But it was like hearing them from very far away, almost through the water. Have you tried to answer? Wake up? Every day, he said without hesitation. But it was like my body wasn't mine anymore. I could think. I could remember. I could even feel emotions. Especially when I heard my daughter asking when Daddy was going to wake up. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I couldn't let anyone know I was still there. This description gave me chills. Medical science tells us that patients in deep comas have no consciousness, that their brains are essentially shut down. However, Michael was describing a prolonged conscious experience during his unconscious state. What changed? I asked. What made the difference that night when you woke up? Michael smiled, though his expression was thoughtful. I think I finally found the door. Or maybe someone opened it for me. His recovery continued to amaze everyone. Within a month, he was walking unaided. His speech was completely normal, his memory intact, and his cognitive function was actually sharper than his initial tests before the accident. The only lasting effects were some minor coordination problems and occasional headaches, minimal considering the severity of his initial injury. But the true miracle wasn't just Michael's recovery, it was watching how it affected everyone around him. Maria, who had kept vigil for 8 weeks, seemed to glow with renewed faith. Jennifer, preparing to become a single mother, was planning for the future again. Little Sophia, too young to understand why her daddy wouldn't wake up, was simply happy to have her playmate back. The ICU nursing staff talked about Michael's case for months afterward. Nurse Jennifer, who was there the night he woke up, later told me it reminded her why she became a nurse. We see so much sadness in the ICU, she said. So many families saying goodbye, so many battles lost. Michael's recovery reminded us that sometimes, just sometimes, we can witness something truly miraculous. The medical community's response was more complex. Some colleagues accepted the case as evidence of the brain's remarkable healing capacity. Others remained skeptical, questioning whether our initial diagnosis had been accurate, wondering if we had missed something in our initial assessments. Dr. Harrison of the University Medical Center was particularly skeptical. Cases like this are often the result of misdiagnosis, he argued during a conference presentation. The patient probably never suffered as serious injuries as initially thought. I understood his position. It's easier to question the diagnosis than to accept that our understanding of brain injury may be incomplete. But I was there every day. I saw the scans, monitored the progression, witnessed the absence of any significant brain activity for weeks. Michael's recovery wasn't the result of a misdiagnosis. It was something beyond our current medical understanding. 3 months after the accident, Michael returned to work. Not in full-fledged construction. His coordination issues made the task unsafe. But he transitioned to project management. His company stood its ground, inspired by his story and impressed by his determination. I saw him regularly for follow-up appointments during his first year of recovery. With each visit, he seemed more like himself, yet he carried a depth that hadn't existed before the accident. He spoke about life differently, appreciated the moments more intensely, and demonstrated a patience that his family said was new. "Doctor," he said to me during one of our twice-yearly follow-up appointments, "I know you're trying to understand what happened medically, but I want you to know that whatever brought me back, I'm grateful to every single person who didn't give up on me. Especially you." I had to look away for a moment. In 15 years of practice, I had developed what I considered an appropriate professional distance. But Michael's case had awakened something in me. The recognition that healing sometimes transcends everything we think we know about medicine. The case was eventually published in the Journal of Neurological Recovery. The article, co-authored with Dr. Peterson and several other experts, documented Michael's recovery in clinical detail. We presented the data objectively, acknowledging both the extraordinary nature of his healing and our inability to fully explain it based on current medical knowledge. But the published article, despite all its meticulous documentation, failed to capture the human dimension of what I had witnessed. It failed to convey Maria's unwavering faith, nor the sound of Sophia's laughter as her father awoke, nor the way Michael's eyes met mine that first night, intelligent, attentive, and somehow grateful for his journey back to consciousness. The case changed the way I practice medicine. Not the technical aspects. I continue ordering the same tests, following the same protocols, making decisions based on evidence and experience. But something fundamental changed in the way I view the relationship between doctor and patient, between science and hope, between what we know and what we don't. I began spending more time with families in waiting rooms. I began to listen differently when patients or their loved ones told me they were feeling something that didn't match the medical data. I realized that in my 15 years of practice, I had focused so much on the science of healing that I had forgotten its mystery. About a year after Michael's recovery, I was giving a presentation at the Chicago Medical Conference on the consequences of traumatic brain injuries. After describing Michael's case, carefully and clinically, with all the appropriate medical caveats, a young resident raised her hand. "Dr. Mitchell," she asked, "do you believe that cases like this suggest that there are aspects of consciousness that we do not yet understand scientifically?" The room fell silent. It was the question everyone was thinking, but few would ask directly. In academic medicine, we are trained to stay within the bounds of what can be proven, measured, and replicated. Admitting that something might exist beyond our current understanding feels dangerously close to abandoning scientific rigor. I looked out at the audience. Dozens of doctors, nurses, and medical students, all dedicated to the practice of evidence-based medicine. All committed to helping patients through the application of scientific knowledge. And all, I suspected, having experienced moments in their careers that didn't fit neatly into medical textbooks. "I believe," he said carefully, "that Michael's case reminds us that the human brain and human consciousness remains one of medicine's greatest mysteries. We have made tremendous advances in understanding neural function, but cases like this suggest we still have much to learn." It wasn't a definitive answer, but it was honest. After the presentation, several colleagues reached out to me privately to share their own experiences with cases that defied medical explanation. Dr. Sarah Kim told me about a patient who was unresponsive for 4 minutes, but returned with memories of conversations that took place while she was clinically dead. Dr. James Taylor described a child with a brain tumor who made a complete recovery that no one could explain. These conversations made me realize that medicine is full of inexplicable moments. We simply don't talk about them very often because they don't fit into our scientific framework. But perhaps that's exactly why we should talk about them more. Michael continued to thrive. 2 years after the accident, he and Jennifer had another baby, a boy they named David, which brought tears to my eyes when they told me. Maria became something of a celebrity at the hospital, known for bringing homemade cookies to the ICU staff and encouraging other families not to give up hope. "She's like our patron saint of impossible recoveries," Nurse Jennifer joked during one of my rounds, but there was truth to her humor. Maria's presence in the hospital had become a source of comfort for families facing their own medical crises. Michael began speaking at support groups for families with brain injuries. His message was always the same: stay hopeful, but also accept help. Don't give up, but don't carry the burden alone. His combination of optimism and realism resonated with people walking the same difficult path as his family. During one of our routine follow-up appointments, 3 years after his accident, Michael brought up something that had been on his mind. Dr. Mitchell, I've been thinking about that time I was unconscious. Remember how I said I could sometimes hear voices? I nodded, remembering our conversation. I was wondering, do you think other coma patients can hear their families too? I mean, if I could hear my mom talking to me, maybe others can too. It was a profound question. Medical research suggests that some coma patients retain some level of auditory processing, but we typically assume they're unaware of what they're hearing. Michael's experience suggested something different, that consciousness can persist even when we can't measure or detect it. What made you think of that? I asked. I've been visiting other families in the ICU sometimes, families who are going through what mine went through. And I tell them to keep talking to their loved ones, keep believing they can hear them, because maybe they can. This simple insight from Michael sparked something in me. I began researching the effects of family interaction on coma recovery. I began encouraging families to maintain verbal contact with unconscious patients, not only for their own emotional healing, but because it could actually aid recovery. The data wasn't conclusive, which rarely happens in cases like these, but there was evidence that patients who received regular verbal encouragement from family members had better outcomes. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to change the way I counseled families. 5 years after Michael's accident, he invited me to Sophia's 9th birthday party. It was held in their backyard in a northwest Chicago suburb, with a bouncy castle, dozens of children, and the kind of chaotic joy that only children's parties can generate. Watching Michael play with his daughter and young son, seeing him laugh with Jennifer, watching Maria surrounded by her grandchildren, I was struck by the ripple effects of his recovery. It wasn't just a man's life that had been restored. It was an entire future that had been returned. Sophia would grow up with her father. The new baby would know his father from the beginning. Maria would watch her son raise his children. Dr. Mitchell! Sophia ran up to me, her face covered in chocolate cake frosting. Daddy told me you helped him wake up from that long sleep. I knelt down to her level. Your father was very strong, and your grandmother never stopped believing he would wake up. I know, she said with the practical certainty that children possess. Grandma talks to God a lot. From the mouths of babies. Sophia had identified something the medical community was reluctant to discuss directly: the role of faith in healing. Not faith as a substitute for medical treatment, but as a complement to it. Maria's unwavering faith had not caused Michael's recovery, but it had sustained her family through the most difficult period, and created an environment where hope could coexist with realistic medical treatment. As the party continued around us, Michael approached me with a serious expression. Doctor, I need to ask you something. Do you think what happened to me was a miracle? It was a question I'd been avoiding for 5 years. In medical school, we're taught to be skeptical of words like miracle. We're trained to seek natural explanations, to trust science and evidence. But standing in that backyard, watching a man who shouldn't have recovered play with children who could have grown up without their father, the word didn't seem unscientific. It seemed inadequate. Michael, I said finally, I think what happened to you reminds us that healing is more complex and mysterious than we sometimes recognize. Whether you call it a miracle, an unprecedented recovery, or something we don't yet understand scientifically, it doesn't change the fact that you're here, healthy, with your family. He smiled and held out his hand. Thank you for not giving up on me, even when the numbers said you should. That handshake, firm, warm, and very lively, encapsulated everything I had learned from Michael's case. Sometimes the most important medical interventions aren't procedures or medications. Sometimes they're simply a refusal to give up, maintaining hope combined with honesty and openness to possibilities that exist beyond the limits of current medical knowledge. The years that followed brought other challenging cases to my practice. Every time I encountered a family facing the possibility of permanent brain injury, I thought of Michael and Maria. Not as false hope. I never promised other families that their loved ones would have the same recovery, but as a reminder that medicine is as much about presence and support as it is about treatment protocols. I began incorporating what I learned from Michael's case into my teaching. When medical students rotated through my practice, I taught them about the importance of listening to families, the power of sustained hope, and the humility that must accompany medical expertise. Your job, I told them, isn't just to treat the brain injury. It's to care for the whole person and support the family through an incredibly difficult time. Sometimes that means admitting we don't have all the answers. A student, a brilliant young woman named Dr. Lisa Chen, challenged me during one of these discussions. But Dr. Mitchell, she said, doesn't giving families false hope cause more suffering when the outcome is bad? Shouldn't we prepare them for the most likely scenario? It was an excellent question, one that touched the heart of medical ethics. How do we balance honesty and hope? How do we prepare families for difficult realities without destroying them? Hope and honesty are not mutually exclusive, I explained. You can acknowledge that the situation is serious, that the chances of full recovery are low, and still support the family's need to hope for the best possible outcome. The key is to be there for them, no matter what. This approach was tested when I met Maria Lopez, a 45-year-old teacher who suffered a massive stroke at work. Her case was eerily similar to Michael's: extensive brain damage, minimal responsiveness, and a family that refused to give up hope. Her husband, Carlos, kept a vigil that was reminiscent of Maria Rodriguez's devotion to her son. He arrived at the hospital every morning at 7, read to her from her beloved books, played her favorite classical music, and talked to her about their teenage daughters, the school events she was missing, and how everyone was waiting for her to come home. The medical team was skeptical. Dr. Peterson, now nearing retirement, contacted me after reviewing her case. David, I know you want to believe that every case can have an outcome like Michael Rodriguez's, but this level of damage caused by stroke, the likelihood of meaningful recovery is virtually zero. Statistically speaking, he was right. But observing Carlos's devotion, seeing the way his daughters sat by their mother's bedside doing homework and chatting about their daily lives, I couldn't completely extinguish their hope. Let's give it time, I said. And let's make sure they have all the support they need, whatever the outcome. Maria Lopez didn't wake up like Michael. After 3 months, her family made the difficult decision to transfer her to a long-term care facility. It was heartbreaking. For them, for me, and for the nursing staff who had grown attached to the family. But something extraordinary happened during those 3 months. The family's experience in the ICU, their unwavering love and presence, had a profound impact on other families going through similar experiences. Carlos became an informal advisor to other family members, offering practical advice on navigating the hospital system and emotional support to maintain hope as they prepared for difficult outcomes. Her daughters, initially shy and withdrawn, began volunteering with the hospital's family support services. They organized care packages for families spending long days in waiting rooms, created a library with books and games for patients' siblings, and started a support group for teenagers dealing with serious family illnesses. Although Maria never regained consciousness, her family's response to the tragedy generated waves of healing that touched dozens of other families. It taught me that sometimes the miracle isn't in the medical outcome. Sometimes it's in how people respond to impossible circumstances with love, grace, and service to others. This experience deepened my understanding of what Michael's case had begun to teach me. Healing goes far beyond individual recovery. It encompasses how communities respond to grief, how families find meaning amid loss, and how healthcare professionals can support the full spectrum of human experience, not just successful medical outcomes. I began speaking at medical conferences about what I called holistic neurological care, an approach that addresses not only brain injury, but also the emotional, spiritual, and social dimensions of recovery and loss. The response was mixed. Some colleagues welcomed the concept enthusiastically, while others worried that it was straying too far from evidence-based medicine. Stanford's Dr. Williams invited me to present a case study at his meeting. During the Q&A session, a senior neurologist pointedly asked, "Dr. Mitchell, aren't you concerned that focusing on hope and faith might distract from the rigorous scientific approach that has made modern neurology so effective?" I had anticipated this question and thought carefully about my answer. "I don't see hope and science as opposing forces," I replied. Michael Rodriguez's case has been extensively studied, published in peer-reviewed journals, and contributed to our understanding of neuroplasticity and coma recovery. But the human elements, his mother's faith, his family's support, the emotional environment in which he was treated, were not obstacles to good medicine. They were part of what made the cure possible. The room was silent for a moment before another doctor raised her hand. "Dr. Mitchell, I've been practicing neurology for 20 years and have seen cases that don't fit our current understanding. Your presentation allows me to acknowledge these experiences without feeling like I'm abandoning scientific rigor. Thank you." That comment meant more to me than any post or professional recognition. It suggested that other doctors were also grappling with the tension between scientific medicine and the inexplicable moments that occasionally occur in healthcare. 10 years after Michael's recovery, I received a call that changed everything again. It was Jennifer, Michael's wife, and she was crying. "Dr. Mitchell, I need to tell you something. Michael has been in another accident. A car accident this time. He's in a coma again." My heart sank. The cruel irony was overwhelming. This man who had defied medical science to recover from one catastrophic brain injury was now facing another. The ride to the hospital seemed endless as I wrestled with questions without convincing answers. Could lightning strike twice? Was there a limit to the trauma a brain could overcome? When I arrived at the ICU, the scene was devastatingly familiar. Michael lay unconscious, surrounded by monitors and medical equipment. But this time, something was different. Maria, now in her 70s but still fervent in her devotion, sat beside her son with a calm that surprised me. "Doctor," she said when she saw me, "I'm not so scared this time. I know something you might not know yet." "What is it, Maria?" "I know he can find his way back. He's done it before." Her confidence was remarkable. Not blind optimism, but faith grounded in experience. She had witnessed an impossible recovery, and that experience had fundamentally changed her view of the relationship between hope and reality. The medical team was more cautious this time. We all knew Michael's history, but we also knew that a second traumatic brain injury often has worse consequences than the first. A brain that somehow recovered once may not have the same capacity to recover again. But Michael's family approached this second crisis differently than the first. They were more organized, more knowledgeable about medical procedures, and more confident in their role as advocates for his care. Sophia, now 19 and in college, took a leave of absence to help coordinate family support. Her 10-year-old son David brought his father's drawings home from school and read stories to him every day after school. The waiting was different this time too. Instead of the desperate uncertainty that had characterized Michael's first coma, his family maintained a vigil that felt more like preparation than despair. They were ready for any outcome, committed to supporting Michael on his journey, wherever it might lead. 3 weeks after his second coma, something extraordinary happened again. Not as dramatic as his first awakening, but still remarkable. During a routine neurological evaluation, Michael opened his eyes, looked directly at me, and said, "Doctor, please tell me this isn't becoming a habit." I laughed through tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Even in his moment of awakening, Michael's sense of humor remained intact. His recovery from the second injury was faster than the first, perhaps because his brain had developed healing pathways it could access more easily, or perhaps because he and his family approached the situation with less fear and more confidence. Maria looked at me with a knowing smile. "Some people," she said, "are just meant to keep fighting." Michael's second recovery solidified something I'd been learning throughout my career, but had never fully articulated. Healing isn't just a medical process. It's a deeply human one. It involves not only the patient's physiology, but also their relationships, their support networks, their sense of purpose, and yes, sometimes, elements that science can't yet measure or explain. Standing in that hospital room, watching Michael play with his family while machines monitored his vital signs, I realized that my 15 years as a neurologist had been preparing me for this moment of understanding. Medicine is most powerful when it combines scientific expertise with a deep respect for the mystery of human resilience. After Michael's second recovery, I changed the way I introduce myself to patients and families. Instead of starting with my credentials or years of experience, I begin by acknowledging that we are about to embark on a journey together, a journey in which I will provide the best medical care possible, recognizing that healing often involves factors beyond my control or understanding. This approach has made me a better doctor. Patients and families trust me more because I'm honest about the limitations of medical knowledge. Paradoxically, this honesty seems to make them more hopeful, not less. When you acknowledge that medicine doesn't have all the answers, you create space for other possibilities to exist. Michael continues to thrive today, more than 15 years after his first accident. He has become a national speaker on brain injury recovery, working with hospitals to improve family support services. His message is always balanced. Respect the medical facts, but don't let statistics define the possibilities. Her case was published in several medical journals and influenced the way neurologists across the country approach coma treatment. Most importantly, it reminded thousands of healthcare professionals that every patient is more than a diagnosis, that every family deserves compassionate care, and that every case teaches us something about the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. Maria, now in her 80s, still brings cookies to the ICU staff every Christmas. She has become something of a legend at Northwestern Memorial, known not only for her son's miraculous recovery, but also for her unwavering faith and her ability to comfort other families facing their most difficult times. When young doctors ask me about the most important lesson of my career, I tell them about Michael Rodriguez. Not because his case proves that miracles do happen, although they can, but because it illustrates that excellence in medical care must always be accompanied by a profound respect for the mystery of human healing. We live in an era of incredible medical advancements. We can map the brain, manipulate genes, and perform surgical procedures that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. But cases like Michael's remind us that, despite all our technological sophistication, we still witness processes we don't fully understand. This isn't a limitation of modern medicine. It's a reminder of its rightful place in the human experience. We are healers, not gods. We are scientists, but we serve something greater than science. We work with measurable realities, but we operate in the realm of immeasurable hope. Some things don't just belong to science, but also to life and faith. Michael Rodriguez taught me that the best medicine happens when we honor both the knowledge we possess and the mysteries we don't yet understand. His story continues to move me because it represents everything I love about being a doctor, the privilege of walking with people in their most vulnerable moments, and occasionally witnessing recoveries that remind us why we chose this profession. If this story touched you, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Stories like Michael's remind us that we are all connected by our ability to hope, heal, and support each other through life's most challenging moments. You are not alone.